The Aeneid by Virgil. Virgil's dates are 70 to 19 BC. The Aeneid is Virgil's great masterpiece that was unfortunately not complete when he died. If you notice the two different spellings from the translation that we will be using, Sarah Hooten's translation of Virgil spells Virgil's name correctly, V-E-R-G-I-L, but V-I-R-G-I-L has become so known that most people continue to use it despite its inaccuracy. So either way is fine. One of them is correct by tradition, one of them is correct according to the Latin. The Aeneid is a great masterpiece. It is an epic that I probably love more than Homer's Odyssey or Iliad. Then again, I might change my mind every time that I teach these texts. Whichever one you're teaching at the time becomes closest to you as you become immersed in the world of that epic. The Aeneid is one of those epics that I've always enjoyed teaching. It is passionate, it is exciting. Many of the episodes feel like they are maybe diluted versions of Homer's epic. Diluted not in the sense of becoming watered down, so maybe that's the wrong word, but more condensed, more intense. The moments that we have from Homer that are kind of scattered throughout the 24 books of the Odyssey or the 24 books of the Iliad have become condensed and retain a stronger flavor when we get to the Aeneid. We will look at the difference between Aeneas as a Roman hero and the heroes that we've seen before in the Odyssey and in the Iliad. And a lot of times when we consider the ancient world of Rome and Greece, we conflate those two entities. But actually there's quite a bit of time that takes place between ancient Rome and ancient Greece. Ancient Rome conquers Greece in 146 BC. The Greek is the older civilization. It predates Rome by approximately 1,000 years. And many events take place in between those two different worlds. When Homer writes his, or composes, or orally translates his work to scribes in approximately the 8th century BC, these are then passed down and the stories are well known, including other ones from the Homeric epic cycles, about the Trojan War and the events that took place. By the time that we get to Virgil writing in 70 to 19 BC, the Homeric world is very well known, but it's not the same world as that of the Romans. The Roman world is very different from the Homeric Greek world. Ancient Greece, as I said, predates ancient Rome by possibly 1,000 years. Rome considered their founding date to be 753 BC, when Romulus first founded the city itself. Greece reached its apex historically in the 5th century and then was conquered by the Persians, by Philip the Macedon and Alexander the Great. Then, as I've said, Rome conquers Greece. And later we have some events that will become very important to Virgil's Aeneid. Julius Caesar's assassination, Octavius's triumph at the Battle of Actium, and the end of the Hellenistic Age. So let's talk about these events a little bit more fully. Rome had had 7 different kingdoms, but later, as it had the Senate in charge, it was very wary of kingdoms. It did not want a king to take central power. When Julius Caesar claimed himself to be the dictator forever, the permanent dictator, many of the senators worried that he was going to found a kingship in Rome. And concerned for this kingship, of course, as you know, if you know Shakespeare or if you just know the story, Brutus and Cassius, 2 of the senators, banded together the other senators and they assassinated Julius Caesar in 44 BC. This led to a civil war because who's going to be the next ruler? So even though they didn't want a king, in a sense, that's what they were headed towards. And so we had 2 competing powers. You had Mark Antony, his major general, and you also had his nephew, Octavius. Octavius and Mark Antony vied for power for the next several years until the Battle of Actium. In the Battle of Actium, Octavius defeats Mark Antony's troops. Mark Antony and Cleopatra flee to Egypt and commit suicide, thus handing the power over to Octavius in full. When Octavius takes over Rome at that point, he names himself Caesar Augustus, right? Caesar the Great One, essentially, Not necessarily king. He was very wary of using that word. He didn't want to be assassinated as his uncle had been assassinated. And so instead of calling himself king, he was always talking about himself as the first citizen, as the primary ruler. These are where we get words such as emperor and prince. And he was using these words as really synonyms for king, but without having the connotations that would have concerned the Senate about his ultimate authority or his rule. So when we look at Virgil's epic, we have Virgil actually leading up to the Battle of Actium. That's going to be kind of the capstone event, even though it never takes place in the Aeneid. It's always the event that is being prefigured in the Aeneid, when one ruler will dominate or destroy the unlawful or tyrannical ruler who would supersede his throne. If we compare the two Homeric epics with Virgil's epic, we have many similarities as well as many differences, not just thematically, but also looking at the worlds themselves and what the Roman expectations would have been versus the expectations of the Homeric world. As mentioned previously, Homer's epic was composed somewhere within the 8th century, and it's composed in Greek. The dactylic hexameter was the heroic hexameter that Homer employed. It's actually a great meter for singing, for emphasizing in song the poetry, for being able to keep that meter throughout thousands of lines as you have an oral tradition. It does not immediately suit the Latin style, the Latin language. And yet Virgil employs it in order to keep this heroic hexameter, to have this different kind of rhythm to the speech of his poem. Even though he's writing his poem, and it actually takes him approximately 10 years to be working on the Aeneid, and the Aeneid, as I've mentioned, was still not finished when Virgil died in 19 BC. And he's writing it rather than composing it orally, he still employs the heroic hexameter to have that same sense of heroic meter, and thus employs it beautifully even with the Latin language. He does compose it in Latin, but he also is able to keep kind of the same mnemonic devices that the Greek composers would have used when singing. So the use of epithets, the use of repetition, many of these same aesthetic devices are employed by Virgil in order to have the feeling in his poem that it is the masterful story or the grand narrative that we have when we have Homer's epics. By this point in time, we have many differences between the divinities in Homer and those of the Roman world. Religiously, a lot of, and again, we can't really say this monolithically, but most of, well, I'm still speaking monolithically, many Roman citizens purported to not believe in the divine gods any longer. They had adopted many of the Greek gods and renamed them. So the Greek gods that became very familiar to us in the Odyssey and the Iliad, Zeus, Hera, Athena, now become the Romanized versions of these. We have Aphrodite becomes Venus, we have Jove instead of Zeus, also known as Jupiter. We have Hera becomes Juno. And yet these were not the gods that the Romans paid tribute to in their daily lives. What you'll notice is, anachronistically at least, Aeneas will carry with him household gods, which were more common in the Roman world. These household gods, called the Penates or the Lares, would have been the gods that they would have paid more tribute to, prayed to, and expected to speak with. These gods were in a sense like guardian angels that watched over the household, and they were the local gods. And this idea of the local gods became significant to the daily life of the Romans. These great grand powers, however, had lost esteem in their culture. They became more of myths and stories and not really deities to be worshipped. At the same time, the idea that there were spirits in charge of water, in charge of rivers, in charge of the sky, was an idea that lingered for quite a bit of time. And so Virgil writes about the world that his characters live in as though everything is alive. We have, this would be the sense of the noumena. We have the river coming to speak with Aeneas. We have the world around him, the things around him, the trees breaking off and bleeding. Everything had a spirit in it that was accessible and could permeate the reality of the humans and be recognized. We also, in the story of Aeneas, you'll get to see the household gods appear to him. You also have the ghosts of people that will appear to them that figure more prominently in the world of the Aeneid than they did in the Odyssey or the Iliad. These haunting figures we did see before. Of course, Patroclus visits Achilles and says, "Please bury me." In a similar way, you have Creusa then appears before Aeneas and will ask him to carry on without her. So we have these lingering ideas of the ghosts, the shades of the former selves of these characters coming to pass. And so the whole mythos of the world is similar, but we have to pay attention to the ways that it is different from the Homeric world. The defining features of the Iliad and the Odyssey, as we have noticed in the previous epics. The Odyssey is defined by Xenia, and so the characters are moral by either their following the reverence of the gods and being hospitable to strangers, or if they eat strangers and are irreverent to the gods. Similarly, in the Iliad, we have the defining feature being kleos. How much does someone respect the immortal fame, the ability for someone to have their name live on and on? And so this idea of immortality and facing one's mortality became central to the Iliad, as it would on any battlefield. When we get to the Aeneid, we still have journeys home, and we have the battle, the war between the Latians and the Trojans. But this time, what's important, or how you choose sides, has less to do with kleos or Xenia, which doesn't really come to play in the narrative as much as pietas and law and order. The Roman world claimed security based on law and order. And so those characters who are moral are the ones who act according to reason, who keep order, who keep control. And those characters who are immoral or impious are the ones who seem out for their own passions. You'll see quite a bit of fury and rage, and they seem consumed by the wrath that overtakes them and gets them to act against the order of the society, against the order of those around them. You'll see the different worldviews also come out with how they respond to individuals versus the community. If you noticed in the Iliad, it became about Achilles. We started the poem by saying, rage, sing, goddess of the rage of Peleus' son, Achilles. And it was all about his wrath driving the narrative against Hector, another individual who comes to embody the noble sentiments of the city. When we get to the Odyssey, it is imperative that all of Odysseus's men die and that the isolated hero returns home and then slaughters everyone else. It is all about Odysseus and his homecoming. So the poem begins, "Sing to me of a man," right? A complicated man who takes many twists and turns to return home. When we get to the Aeneid, it's not just about one man's journey or the war, about one man fighting in this war. Instead, it becomes about an entire nation, about, not even a nation, sorry, that's the wrong word. It becomes about a world, an empire, the Roman citizenry, and all of the people that are founding it. So Aeneas must, in order to succeed as a hero of this tale, bring all of his Trojan men with him to Italy. He must have a nation to found. He must have a group of people and not just be a solo warrior.